I'll explain that in a second. Well, good morning. Welcome to this month's Launchpad lecture here at the New Mexico Museum of Space History. I am, as always, Chris Orwoll. I am still the executive director of the museum here. They haven't fired me yet, and I use that line every time. So they just haven't figured out what they're dealing with. So in any case, welcome to all of you. In case you all didn't know, this thing here, it's not a microphone for, blasting out here. You all can hear me. We have a camera in the back there, so we actually broadcast this over a system called Periscope. And we get anywhere from, some months we'll get 50, 35 people, listening in. Sometimes we'll get like 3,500 plus people, and this is all over the world that are listening in. So for those folks, also welcome. Thank you for joining us here this morning. We're going to be talking about Apollo 11, and we haven't gone through a time warp. The date is not July 6th, as I put up here, and you all pointed out. So I'm going to use the excuse. We've had a lot of water problems up here. We were dealing with that all week long with the city. And so I didn't get a chance to prepare my lecture until yesterday and bright and early this morning, because we had the 4th of July celebration yesterday as well. So in any case, I stayed up the night before the whole night watching the Stranger Things episodes that dropped on Netflix with my family. And so, yeah, a little sleep deprived. So, yeah, I'll use that as an excuse. In any case, I always start off with a quote at the beginning. This one's very obvious. Houston Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed. That's what we're here to talk about. And we're going to kind of go through this. Talking about Apollo 11 is a huge undertaking. There's so much to speak about that has to do with why we even did it. I'm just going to try and condense things down. We're going to go through kind of an overview, talk about some of the key elements, things that you might not have heard before. And then in the end, talk a little bit about, the fact that this is the 50th anniversary. Most of us in this room, with some exceptions, probably remember where we were when this happened. This is one of those seminal events like that. In any case, though, just background on me for those of you who might have heard and everybody else. I grew up in Downey, California, where these two things were built, the Apollo Command and Service Module and the Space Shuttle. They used to bring back the astronauts after the missions for kind of a thank you to the folks who built their flying ship, as it were. They did this tour. They'd come back. People would line up. My mom, who's sitting right there, would take me, and she's right here, would take me to all of these things. And that's me right there, having just shaken John Young's hand. So I idolized some of these folks, from the very beginning. Went to this place, graduated in 1986 from the Naval Academy, drove these things around for 20 years, planned a trip for my family to a museum after retiring, and ended up running it. Did that for 5.5 years, and then came down here. This is my family. This picture was taken a number of years ago, but just wanted to let you know that, yeah, I do send my family to space. That is their picture up on the International Space Station. 50th anniversary of all the Apollo missions. We are into them hot and heavy now. We have celebrated, sadly, Apollo 1 and the fire that occurred on board there. The missions Apollo 7, 8, 9, and 10. Our first trip to the moon, the first time that the lunar module's in space, the dress rehearsal, the first time the Apollo Command Module flew. Now we're into the final phase of the lunar landing to meet Kennedy's goal that he had set. So, Neil Armstrong, the important achievement of Apollo is demonstrating that humanity is not forever chained to this planet, and our visions go rather further than that, and our opportunities are unlimited. We're talking about these things, the big Saturn V rockets that went to the moon. So Apollo 11. You see here the patch for Apollo 11. Michael Collins, right here in the middle, the command module pilot, did the design for the mission. And even though 3 men, Neil Armstrong, Mike Collins, and Buzz Aldrin, were the ones flying to the moon, you don't see their names anywhere on the patch, as opposed to the other missions and all the other mission patches. They did that on purpose. They did that very much on purpose. You'll also notice that normally the NASA designation is Roman numeral, Apollo 11, XI. But you see here it's 11, and they thought that this is a worldwide mission. There were a lot of countries that XI might have been confusing for, so they just used the numeral 11. The lunar surface, because they were going to land on the lunar surface. The Earth off in the distance. The Eagle, indicating America, but no overt American flag on it, because the point was that the whole world, in their minds, was going to the moon. This was everybody's mission. And so originally, it had the olive branch in the eagle's mouth and the talons as it was coming down to land. But the NASA administrators thought that the talons looked a little too warlike, And so they just switched it up a little bit and put the olive branch down into the eagle's talons, and thus was born the mission patch, and you've seen this on U.S. coins and things like that. So in any case, the original 7-step plan, and some of you who come to these Launchpad lectures have heard this before in a previous lecture, was that we were going to have unmanned tests of the Saturn V, the Block 1 capsule in Earth orbit. That was Apollos 4 and 6. And please, we won't go into the whole number designation for Apollo missions, because there was AS-101, AS-201. There was also, SA-1. There was a whole bunch of different designations. But in any case, Apollo 4 and 6 were test missions of the rockets themselves. No people on board. Unmanned lunar module in Earth orbit was a B mission. That was Apollo 5. Manned Earth orbit flight of the Command and Service Module, the CSM, that was Apollo 7. We did that in October 1968. And this was their plan. We didn't do it in October 68. We did it another time. But in any case, this is the plan. Manned lunar module in low Earth orbit. We did that with Apollo 8. Apollo 8 was what was supposed to be that in December 1968. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Manned lunar module in elliptical medium Earth orbit, about 3,500 nautical miles out away from the Earth and back. So we get further out with the lunar module and the command module together. Then a manned command and service module in lunar orbit going around, and then the moon landing. So it didn't exactly occur that way because the lunar module wasn't ready to fly. It ended up getting adjusted, so this bit stayed the same. And then we have Apollo 7 in October, manned flight of the command and service module. Apollo 8, instead of being the lunar module and command module, because the lunar module wasn't ready, becomes send the command module to the moon. Just send it there to the moon. We test out a whole bunch of navigation issues, equipment issues, all those sort of things. That is that Hail Mary pass that NASA did, and works out fantastic. Then we have a manned lunar module in elliptical medium Earth orbit mission planned. Or it's supposed to be in a low orbit. Sorry, I think I wrote that down wrong. So Apollo 9 in March 69, they canceled Apollo 8. This was supposed to be a regular Earth orbit. This was supposed to be the elliptical orbit. And in any case, though, they canceled that mission because we'd already done everything for that with Apollo 8. And then the command service module and lunar module orbit, that ends up being Apollo 10, the dress rehearsal, and then Apollo 11. Other thing that happens in here is that you have a bit of a crew change, because originally the Apollo 11 crew was Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, but Jim Lovell was the command module pilot. What ends up happening is that Mike Collins has to come in and fill in for Jim Lovell because he had an issue. He delays out. On the Apollo 8 mission, the command module pilot for that mission had a problem. Jim Lovell flies on Apollo 8. And Mike Collins gets put in as the command module pilot for Apollo 11. Neil Armstrong was given the option of changing back to Jim Lovell, but he said, nope, I want Jim Lovell to have a chance to command his own mission now that he's flown on Apollo 8. Don't put him back on my crew, because that's what would have prevented him from flying again, potentially, and commanding. So he said, no, Jim Lovell ends up flying and commanding the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission. But that's how Mike Collins ends up flying on that mission. He even had a back problem as well, because he was originally the one who was supposed to fly on Apollo 8. Jim Lovell swapped with him, so that's kind of how that all occurred. So, in any case, though, the landing site that was selected for Apollo 11, and this shows all the landing sites, so where you've got 16, 12, 14, 15, 17, and 11 right there. The yellow ones are where we had some Surveyor spacecraft land, and the red ones are Luna missions, the Russian missions. You'll see that we had a Surveyor craft land fairly close to Apollo 11, and it had surveyed the area, etc. So in any case, the selection site for 11, I didn't memorize this, so there were certain very specific criteria that mattered to NASA. The site needed to be smooth, relatively few craters, approach paths free of large hills, tall cliffs, or deep craters that might confuse the landing radar and cause it to issue incorrect readings, reachable with a minimum amount of propellant, allowing for delays in the launch countdown, providing the Apollo spacecraft with a free return trajectory that would allow it to coast around the moon and then come back to Earth, good visibility during the landing approach, meaning that the sun needed to be between about 7 and 20 degrees behind the lunar module, and then a general slope of less than 2 degrees to the landing area. Very important to NASA because this is the first time landing on the moon. You really don't know what you don't know until you do it the first time. So the propellant issue is very key. The lighting issues for them, very key. That limited them down to one launch window per month. because of all of these criteria. But that's what, so for the Apollo 11 launch, very flat area, the Sea of Tranquility. Was where they ended up choosing, their landing location based on the Surveyor spacecraft that had gone around, Apollo 8 and Apollo 10 that had flown the moon, and they'd surveyed these areas. That's how they ended up choosing the landing site for Apollo 11. Later on, we're landing in the middle of mountain ranges, because we'd learned that how we could control the spacecraft. Apollo 11, get it down and land. Apollo 12, which we'll talk about later on this year in another lecture like this, that was a precision landing, because we were trying to land right next to a Surveyor spacecraft, right here, and we did it. So, in any case, and that's another interesting thing. I say we. Did you ever notice that? Americans, we landed on the moon. We did it. Okay, there were over 400,000 people who worked on that program. It's one of those degrees of separation. Most everybody who was in America was a limited number of degrees of separation away from somebody who worked on the program. So very directly. I grew up in Downey, California. A lot of people worked on the program in Southern California, and in my hometown, quite a few. In fact, my wife's father worked on that, worked on the program. In any case, though, this was for all Americans. We still consider it, an achievement that we did, even though necessarily specifically we didn't, because it was such a matter of national pride. It was part of, it was the space race. It was the Cold War. It was, go down, so many different things. But it's one of those interesting notes in the American collective conscious that we still talk about that. Although the phrase, if they can land a man on the moon, why can't, so we still say they in that situation. It's like the great they. If they can land a man on the moon, why can't, but the Apollo program started off, we launched this little thing here in New Mexico. Okay, yes, we did that with the Little Joe booster, and then worked our way up to the Saturn V's with the different test equipment, and then also the rockets where we did Apollo 7 with the smaller Saturn. So this was the Little Joe 2 that we launched. That's a whole separate lecture that we do at times, but this was launched in New Mexico and was testing out the escape system for the command module. The astronaut selection that is part of this whole program. So you kind of go back. So we had the original, the Mercury 7, which were chosen. None of them flew on this mission. Those was the first group of astronauts. The Group 2, which was nicknamed the New 9, which included, I talked about Jim Lovell, so he's in there. Neil Armstrong, right there. He was one of the second group of astronauts that was chosen. These folks flew on Gemini as well. Then we had Group 3 that came in with people like Mike Collins and Buzz Aldrin. So he was in the third. They were in the third group of astronauts that came in, and a number of these folks flew on, and a couple of them commanded later on Apollo missions. You've got command module pilots, lunar module pilots, etc. In this group. And then Group 4 was the scientist astronauts. Jack Schmitt, New Mexican astronaut, was the only one of this group to fly on Apollo during the main missions. Skylab, separate story. And then Group 5, a number of these folks flew as lunar module pilots, etc. Just wanted to kind of see the groups of astronauts that were chosen and that worked in and on the Apollo program. Excuse me. So these are our three astronauts who end up being part of the mission. This is after they announced the final grouping, as you can see, because Mike Collins is here. So you got Buzz Aldrin, Neil Armstrong, and Mike Collins. Remember our swap between Jim Lovell and Mike Collins. But in any case, training for the mission, extensive amounts of training in the time leading up to when they flew. Training inside the command module. This is them inside there inspecting the command module that eventually they're going to fly in and doing some egress training. Excuse me, this is not the one that they were going to fly in. This is a different one that they were doing egress training in, learning how to specifically operate the door that was replaced after the Apollo 1 fire and was a little bit more, a lot more complicated, but much easier to get out of the spacecraft with seconds instead of never or minutes. So yeah, get in and get used to walking around in your A7L spacesuit. So you get into the Vomit Comet, the aircraft that would fly up and do parabolic flights up and down and up. Greatest roller coaster ride ever is what I've heard from the folks who have done it. So, and every time that you were going up over the top, you would get weightless for a period of time, and you could test out what it was like to be weightless. But more importantly, you can also adjust the parabolic flight so that you're at 1/6 gravity. Now you can test out what it's like to walk on the surface of the moon. Because once again, that much equipment on you, normally here on Earth, 1G, we kind of walk along. Now put all that equipment on. First of all, it's going to be extremely heavy. It's not designed to work on Earth. It's designed to work in 1/6 gravity. But walking in 1/6 gravity is radically different than walking here on Earth. They actually talked about it where like skipping was actually much easier to do, almost like a kangaroo hop as you went along to move quickly, etc. Problems with the lunar surface, which we really didn't know until we stepped out onto it. The fine grains of it, it was a little bit slippery, even for them, was another thing that they discovered on this mission. We learned a lot from that very short period of time that Neil and Buzz were on the surface of the moon. In any case, though, learning how to get suited up for training, up and down the ladder. You'll notice, interestingly enough, you see a strap here. It's also hooked on to Neil. He went down the ladder. He was actually strapped to the spacecraft. And this was an object that they were going to use to raise and lower the moon rocks, but they also could use it as essentially a safety strap. And he's the only one who went down on it. They discovered it really wasn't necessary, useful, and actually kind of hindered their progress. They also discovered that moving the moon rock containers, lunar surface sample containers, up and down with that device was also difficult, and from then on they just kind of handed the rock boxes and everything and the sample containers up and down. So that's Neil getting training. Buzz here, same thing. See he's carrying one of the equipment packages. This is one designed to be operated in Earth gravity, simulating 1/6 gravity. So it's the same shape and size, but it's not the same weight as what the real one was. The real one was a lot heavier. In any case, though, stepping on and back up, they learned that hopping up was the easiest way to do it, as opposed to kind of trying to lift your leg in the spacesuit and get it up to that last rung on the ladder. How to pick up lunar samples. You can see they've got a whole lunar surface area set up out here that they can dig in and kind of get used to what they were going to do right around the spacecraft. Mike Collins, training as well on the command module. In this situation, he's not getting into a command module. He's getting into a centrifuge to do some training inside the centrifuge, inside the command module training here. So, as you can imagine, with the training regimen, besides Johnson Space Center, where they were training at that point in time there in Texas, or the Manned Spacecraft Center at that point in time. So they were also spending a lot of time, the astronauts who were going to be in the lunar module, with the folks up in Grumman in Long Island, and Mike Collins out in California in Downey, working with the folks at North American Aviation to get ready for their mission. Training inside the lunar module. You don't have to be in a spacesuit all the time when you're just learning to go through the checklists here and procedures, et cetera, et cetera. The Lunar Landing Training Vehicle, LLTV, the Flying Bedstead, was what this was called. And here's Neil standing in front of it. This thing almost killed him. So computer-controlled jets, it would simulate the 1/6 gravity flying in. It would simulate the flight characteristics of the lunar module here on Earth, but simulating the 1/6 gravity as well, with jets that would kind of provide the extra thrust to make it seem like it was operating above the lunar surface. A very difficult thing to fly. Here you kind of see it in action. You can see all these jets thrusting for the maneuvering engines. The controls were the same as what they would be on the lunar module, but it would give you the simulation of what it was like to fly, or what they expected it to be like to fly the lunar module. This is the one that almost killed Neil. So the computer had a malfunction, and in the end, the craft started going out of control and ended up flipping in the end and crashing to the ground. He ejected at the last second before it flipped over. He tried to control it. Typical flight, flight engineer, trying to hold on to it till the bitter end, until he couldn't anymore, and then hit the eject. And you see him actually parachuting here. Yeah, bit through his lip pretty bad afterwards. Geology training. This is not the Apollo 11 crew, just showing you some of the things. This is actually training in New Mexico, though, so that they did for one of the later missions, where they were by Hadley Rill, and the gorges up in northern New Mexico were almost exactly the same size, et cetera, so they did geology training there. But here you see Neil and Buzz doing geology training. Interesting connection here to New Mexico, though. And I always kind of come back to that nugget that is New Mexico, even in the bigger pictures here. Buzz Aldrin's got a jacket on here, and it's got a little symbol right here. Here's the guys all wearing those jackets when they were up at the Philmont Ranch. And that's the Philmont jacket that he has on right here. even training later for the Apollo program. This was much earlier on that they're training, and there's Buzz right there. So, but just interesting connections as always. That training before was in Arizona, the picture of Neil and Buzz. And here there's Neil Armstrong right there as well, doing training out at Philmont Ranch. The spacecraft were being prepared, so not only you're training the astronauts, you're preparing and building and putting the spacecraft together. This was a briefing early on, and you can kind of see here, you know, the boilerplate for the command module. You see the lunar module here. You know this is earlier on in the program because of that right there. The circular hatch at the front, the final hatch on the command module was actually square. They tried it with the circular hatch, and the backpack wouldn't go through it with the square backpack that the astronauts had for the PLIS, Portable Life Support System. There's also a number of other things, but I'm not going to go into those. Excuse me. And then here you got the service module that would be underneath this, because you always hear say command module or command and service module. There's the service module. This is what's attached to this. There's the big engine for it that would, you know, propel you towards the moon and propel you back. Actually, the upper stage propelled you toward the moon, but you could maneuver with this on the way to the moon. And then flying back, you had to fire that engine again to bring you back to Earth. So, in any case, the command module built, like I said, in Downey, California. Here you see it without its shell on, so you're seeing some images of it here under construction. Notice always the white suits, the hard hats, etc., as they're trying to keep the spacecraft clean, free of, you know, issues from them, you know, keep their own clothes clean, etc. The lunar module being constructed here, you see the circular hatch, and there you go. You know, this is an early version, not only of the interior portions of the spacesuit. These are concept bits. A lot of things on this one you see that are different, but you see that kind of a more circular, not as big on the square backpack, you know, and the astronauts were trying to get in and out of it. They just discovered it was too hard. Originally, they were even looking at a rope ladder to come off the side. I mean, for anybody who's been in the Navy, trying to climb down the side of a ship, you know, when you're just in 1G with just your regular clothes on, it's not easy. Not easy at all, let alone trying to do it on the surface of the moon with all of that gear on, you know, etc. So, yeah, they quickly abandoned that idea and eventually just put a ladder on the front rung of the spacecraft. There obviously was no way that I could ever show you all the pictures of everybody, you know, who worked on the spacecraft. So here's just some of the Grumman folks. By the way, there's kind of the interior of the lunar module, you know, without its skin on. Fascinating story. The story of the structure of the lunar module is a lecture in and of itself. The neat thing is that right now we're working with NASA and the White Sands Test Facility. They have the lunar module. It's called a lunar test vehicle, or a lunar test article, that was utilized to test all the engines on the lunar module. They had, you know, an actual vehicle without the skin on the outside, and they attached all the engines to it, and they put it into the chambers and tested all the engines attached to the structure just to make sure everything worked, that they'd fire off correctly, that the systems were, you know, were built properly, etc. So they built a number of lunar test articles that were utilized for vibration testing, pressure testing, engine testing, etc. They're full-on lunar modules, built the exact same as the ones that flew, just without some of the components put like around the outside. That is looking to come to us here within the year. And so it's been in storage over at White Sands Test Facility ever since the Apollo program. But we'll bring it over here. We won't be able to put it on display in our current facilities, but we will be able to put it on display, hopefully, if we get the building that we're looking at that's just above where the theater is. In any case, Werner von Braun out at the Grumman plant, you know, checking out the designs and plans and concepts for the lunar module. More of it in construction, and now you're mating the spacecraft together. The large Saturn V rocket, you know, you just see here part of the first stage of it with the 5 F1 engines. We have one of those on display out in our rocket park if you ever want to stand next to one of those and see what it is. Ours is split apart because when you shipped it, it actually was in 2 pieces. And so we still have it on the shipping assembly and split apart. Normally the engine obviously would be put together. But in any case, so assembly of the spacecraft, the instrumentation ring going on, mating up the command and service module with the upper stages here. Same thing. You know, and this is all done in the Vehicle Assembly Building, that very large, massive building that NASA has down at Kennedy Space Center. There it is, after having been assembled. When they rolled it out while Apollo 10 was on its way to the moon. So, Here it is going down the crawlerway. So here's the launch pad here, and then underneath it is the crawler that's bringing it out to the pad. They had 2 crawlers, which are now nicknamed Hans and Franz, from the Hans and Franz, that comedy routine. In any case, though, we actually have one of the control panels for the crawler, and it's interesting. The speedometer on it goes up to 3 miles an hour. Man, you are flying down that crawlerway. So, very slow moving. And if you want to see we want to see it on the big screen, we're actually showing Apollo 11 first steps in our theater now. Great movie, but very close imagery of this. It starts off the movie. The first scenes are of this thing coming down the crawlerway, and you're right there listening to it and feeling it as it's moving along. It's really nice, really nice. So in any case, get it out to the launch pad. This is kind of a view looking up at the rocket at Apollo 11 from the ground below. The crew, as we get towards the mission, gets quarantined right before the mission. You don't want them to get exposed to anything before they fly, and last thing you want is a sick astronaut on the way to the moon. So anybody who goes to talk to him has to be tested. This is one of the reporters who's going out to interview him right before the mission. You got to get blood tests to make sure that you weren't sick at all, et cetera, et cetera. Any sign of a sniffle? Nope, you weren't getting anywhere near the astronauts. So, launch day, and the days approaching launch day, because you can see a lot of tents and other things out here. Over 1 million people viewed the launch there, right along the Space Coast area there, right around Canaveral and Cocoa Beach, et cetera, Merritt Island, and lined up along the causeways, the beaches, anywhere where you could get a view looking out towards the launch pad. Was anybody here? Or, excuse me, here. Was anybody there in Florida? Yeah, and that's exactly it. So it was, it was 1 million people into an area that didn't have the infrastructure it does now. And if you go to a shuttle launch now, or when we were doing shuttle launches, and as you try to get out to the launch pad, even with the bigger infrastructure now, smaller crowds, it's still backed up a ton on launch day. It was crazier back then, but 1 million people viewed it there. Over 25 million people in America alone viewed the launch of Apollo 11 on launch day. So out there you had former President Lyndon B. Johnson, you had the Vice President there, Spiro Agnew, part of the Nixon administration, and a huge number of VIPs. In fact, if you go to see our movie, Johnny Carson is shown walking around. They have video of him walking around and talking to somebody on launch day. So lots of people there watching launch. Like I said, over 25 million Americans alone at that point in time were watching it out there. People, this is a picture of people actually watching the moonwalk, and you can imagine the launch was watched by that many people. The moonwalk, when we landed, was watched by even more. Basically, 20% of the world's population watched the moonwalk. So, and that's the people who could watch it. The percentage of that is even higher. So people at the plants watching it. This is at Grumman, all over the world. This is in Japan. They're watching it. Yeah, I love this videotaping, and listening. Reporters, there were 3,500 reporters at the launch site when Apollo 11 launched. Dave Dooling, who's our education director, was one of them. He was there as a reporter at the launch on launch day, and here they are. They're a bit closer, as you can see, looking out towards the launch pad. The launch itself, or the crew ingress itself. So the White Room is where the crew enters into the spacecraft. They go up the elevators, they come across the catwalk, and then go into the White Room. And here, you got Mike Collins and Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin across here. This was not on launch day. This was another day, but just showing you a picture of what it looked like as they went in. It's interesting. We have one of these panels right here that we're going to be putting up in our simulated White Room down by the elevators, because we're trying to make those look a little bit like this White Room area right here. In any case, though, one of the stories I tell in my Anecdotes of Apollo, some of you have heard this, some of you haven't, I'm going to retell here. When they got to this point, the astronauts and the team that was putting them into the capsule, headed up by Gunter Wendt, used to give each other gag gifts, or just gifts of some sort. In this situation, the Apollo 11 mission was no different. the crew brought out for Gunter and gave him, Neil Armstrong gave him this card, free ride on a space taxi, good for one round trip fare between any planet, moon, star, or galaxy in the solar system, no limitations on distance, travel in comfort at the speed of light, only the latest spacecraft used. Just a little joke, and these were always just little silly jokes. Like on the Apollo 14 mission, Gunter gave Al Shepard a cane, lunar support equipment, because Al Shepard was the oldest astronaut, So, it's just kind of goofy stuff. In any case, though, a little on the more serious side, Buzz Aldrin gave him a good news for modern man. They were both Presbyterian lay ministers. And so, and Buzz Aldrin, very devout Presbyterian. In any case, Gunter, the same way. And so, in any case, Buzz Aldrin, when they land on the surface of the moon, there'd been a big issue with Madeleine O'Hare Murray. I think that's, I blanked on the, Madeleine Murray O'Hare, yep, so sorry about that. On the Apollo 8 mission, because they read from the book of Genesis, sued the government. Not that the lawsuit went anywhere, but it created a little bit of a public relations issue within NASA. Buzz wanted to do communion on the surface of the moon because he was a Presbyterian lay minister, and NASA was like, so in any case, he did that, but he didn't really announce what he was doing, etc. He did make an announcement hoping that everybody would kind of join together at this moment, etc. And you can read that online if you want to read everything he said, but it wasn't super overt. And then he served himself communion on the surface of the moon. But in any case, and this was not long after landed, that's what Buzz gave Gunter. Mike Collins went a slightly different route. So when you see them walking down the passageway after they had just gotten suited up, you see Neil Armstrong right here, you see Mike Collins right here. They're carrying the kind of the support packs that are providing cooling, etc., inside the suit and oxygen for them to be breathing. Mike Collins is carrying his here, and you just see he's got his hands and he's going along, nothing in there. When they come out, though, you got Neil Armstrong here, Mike Collins, and Buzz Aldrin right here. Mike Collins all of a sudden carrying a paper bag, brown paper bag, grocery bag. For those of us who remember the brown paper grocery bags. So here they are coming along. There's that brown, on the other side of his pack is the brown paper bag. So there it is right there. You can't miss it now. And somebody between the two sets of double doors gave it to him, was holding on to it and gave it to him as he went through. So he prearranged this. Brown paper bag. Walking down the catwalk, there's the brown paper bag right there as they're going down to the launch thing. This is what was inside. Gunter was an avid fisherman. Mike was an avid fisherman. The astronauts spent a lot of time at Gunter's house because they could get away from the media there. And Gunter had a boat. They would go out fishing, etc. Mike had noticed that Gunter didn't have any trophy fish on his wall. So he created this. And that fish right there is about this long. It is the teeniest, tiniest thing you have ever seen. It was just, at the time, it was just nailed onto it and stuck in a freezer. Frozen, so as he's carrying. So you got multiple issues going on here. Gift funny. Gunter watched him come in. Now, you're not supposed to have flammables in the White Room. Brown paper bag, big wooden, and the fish could burn, I guess, as well. So, but in any case, so this was the gag gift they got to him. They got a big laugh out of it. Gunter hid it very quickly, and then he threw it into his freezer where it stayed for a very long time until they got it, dried and flash froze, or dried out, etc. So. We had, at the old museum I was at, we had all those items on display for a while, so now they've been sold to private collectors. So they're in private hands now. Not that the museum sold them, Gunter's family sold them. So, in any case, after he passed away. And we launch Apollo 11 after all of these preparations. Geez, we're just up to the launch, I better speed up. So, in any case, though, we head on our way to the moon. Here we go from the launch room. One of my favorite shots of the mission going past the American, in the distance going past the American flag. Get out on the way to the moon. About 30 minutes after they're on their way to the moon, Mike Collins takes the command module, pulls it, separates it, turns around, docks to the lunar module, pulls it out of the upper stage, and then they fire their engines on the way to the moon, and there's a kind of a separation burn between the craft, and the upper stage goes into a huge solar elliptical orbit, and they just didn't want it potentially crashing into the moon because they thought it might interfere with their landing. So in any case, though, this is after they get to the moon, they get into orbit around the moon, and it's landing day. Now, so I'm kind of skipping past, obviously, a lot of stuff that was just transit. So you separate the two spacecraft. They do a maneuver with the lunar module so that Mike Collins can look out and make sure that everything is fine. Neil Armstrong says the eagle has wings. You know, when they deploy the legs, because the legs are tucked in when they're flying, and then they deploy them out. And they start the process down towards the surface. Charlie Duke is the Capcom for the landing. Just wanted you to see a picture of Charlie Duke. He eventually lands on Apollo 16 on the surface of the moon and walks around there. So you got Jim Lovell in the background and Fred Hayes, part of the backup crew for Apollo 11, and working also as kind of adjunct Capcoms as well. And so monitoring the mission as well from like Capcom row here. So, and capsule communicator, in case you didn't know what Capcom stood for. So in any case, the landing itself, and by the way, if you go to our theater and see the movie, the sequence of the landing is absolutely phenomenal, because you're looking out the window of the spacecraft, following it along with all of the time call-outs, etc., and all of the alarms and everything else. So what happened is, because of maneuvers, etc., the spacecraft was flying just a little bit faster than expected. The computer, first time utilizing all of these computers all the way down to the lunar surface. When the spacecraft pitched over at the final portions of the mission, well, let me go back from that. As they were flying and they're operating their rendezvous radar and also the surface radar were working at the same time. And they had the rendezvous radar on in case they had an abort. The switch was left on purpose. That created an overflow in the computer, such that it was trying to process so much information and it was backing up. So they started getting 1201 and 1202 alarms in their system, and all of this stuff gets displayed on a disky like this, display keyboard. In any case, though, this is actually a modern replica of it, and you can do the same exact programs like they did, you can do with this once you power it up. So you can simulate any of the missions with the disky, and this is something that we're going to try to put on display and have it showing all of the programs in operation from the Apollo missions. In any case, though, 1201 and 1202 alarms. Now, as you're trying to land on the surface of the moon and you got a lot of stuff going on, to start getting these alarms going off in the spacecraft back at mission control, everybody's trying to figure out what's going on. Steve Bales is the guidance officer down in the trenches at mission control. Jack Garman is one of the guys in the back room. Each of the people in mission control who was there sitting, the flight controllers, had a whole team in the back rooms that was supporting them, seeing the same information they were, seeing additional information as well, and providing them information that they could then be the central point of contact that was for their area, whether it was guidance, booster, whatever. So all of these different flight controllers, they would then put everything through the flight director, who made the final decision, and then and then he didn't talk directly with the spacecraft. The Capcoms did that. That was the setup. So you've got Steve Bales as the guidance officer. They start getting these alarms in. Steve Bales even admits afterwards, he's like going, I'm trying to remember what family that alarm is in, let alone exactly what it means. Jack Garman in the back room instantly recognizes what's going on, processes through. It's like going, okay, the computer's getting overflow information from too many radar data points being sent into it, but it's not a problem yet. As long as we don't, get excessive repeats on it, we're good to go on that one. He tells that information very quickly to Steve Bales, to Steve Bales, who passes on, hey, we're a go on that 1201 alarm. Now, they do continue to get the 1201 and 1202 alarms intermittently as they're on their way down, but they're able to now say, okay, we're still a go because we're getting good information. It's just that the computer's having trouble keeping up because we were giving it too much. They fixed that on the later missions, but this first time, that goes on. Adds a little bit of stress, needless to say, as they're coming down. Last bit, spacecraft pitches over, now a little bit faster. Guidance computer going the first time. They're not exactly where they thought they were going to be, and what is Neil Armstrong looking down at that the computers put him to land at? 300-foot wide, shallow crater with a boulder field in it. You can't land a lunar module with those spindly legs on the boulders. All sorts of bad things can happen. So he takes semi-manual control of the spacecraft, pitches a little bit forward and keeps flying past the boulder field. You're down, and flies over the boulder field, gets it down a little bit further, starts heading down, realizes, okay, there's a crater here that I don't want to put a lunar lander leg into, West Crater, flies a little bit further beyond that, and then eventually puts it down with about 15 seconds of fuel left. So the last call out from mission control to the spacecraft was 60 seconds of fuel, and then they were dead silent, as they're going in. So in any case, with the exception of all the call outs inside the spacecraft. Charlie Duke, like I said, is the Capcom. Neil Armstrong lands. Eventually here, and the slide's going to come up. And I'll get to it, the first words that were said on the surface of the moon. So think about that, and I'll come up to the slide where that is eventually. I thought I had it right here, but in any case, and see who knows what the first words that were spoken from the surface of the moon. So because we'll talk about that. In any case, though, they land. They're supposed to take a 5-hour rest period and then do their moonwalk, their lunar EVA. Crew's too hyped up. No way. That ain't happening. So, and NASA kind of expected this as well. So Neil and Buzz say, hey, we recommend doing the EVA, as soon as we get everything settled in here. What do you think? NASA, it doesn't take them very long because they thought this was very likely. Said, yep, let's go ahead and do that. So originally the moonwalk was supposed to be on July 21st. It ends up being on July 20th. So in any case, Neil Armstrong climbs out. There was controversy about who was supposed to be the first one out. Right up until almost, not the bitter end, but into the months just before the mission. Because traditionally, you have 2 pilots in Gemini. Commander stayed inside the spacecraft, and the pilot, the second pilot on board, would be the one doing the spacewalk. When you do Apollo 9, Commander stayed inside, and the command module pilot, lunar module pilot, did the spacewalk. Things like that. So Buzz Aldrin pretty much figured he's the one getting out and doing the first step onto the surface of the moon. And some of the original plans also had it that way as well. NASA thinks about this, and everything goes into the discussions of what ends up making this determination. Personalities of the astronauts, skills, layout of the spacecraft, everything. But in the end, NASA says, commander of the mission is going to be the first one out of the spacecraft, first one to step foot on the moon. So in the end, the decision is made. Neil's doing it. Buzz still lobbied for obvious reasons. Wouldn't you want to be first? So in any case, though, and he did. Neil Armstrong was kind of, whichever way it goes. So different personalities. This crew was not close. They worked very well together, but they weren't close, really, in any way, shape, or form. Not like Apollo 12, where they were friends. Very, very good friends. In any case, though, Neil Armstrong climbs down ladders. He's climbing down. He pulls a D-ring that drops down the mace of the modular equipment something assembly. Oh, shoot, I just blanked. In any case, support assembly. So where some of the things that tools that they're going to use on the surface of the moon are located, and a camera as well, a video camera. Start sending back. Cameras on Earth, it's a slow scan camera sending the signals back to Earth, the video cameras. Broadcast TV can't use slow scan camera images, so they broadcast it in, and then one of the TV, one of the broadcast entities showed their camera filming literally, the slow scan camera images at the receiving locations. That's what was broadcast all over the world, not the original footage from the moon. It was a video, or a TV TV camera looking right at the screen that was coming back on. In any case, though, so that's taking images of Neil more from the side. This is looking out the window of the spacecraft as Neil goes down. That's that assembly that I talked about with the strap that's on him right there. This is what it looked like as well. So in any case, with the pulley, this is from the mesa looking more towards the side where Neil Armstrong was stepping down. And he gets down to the bottom of the rung. He gets a feel for the surface of the moon. He talks a bit with mission control about what everything looks like, how far the pads are depressed into the surface of the moon, what the moon surface looks like, and then eventually does take that first step onto the lunar surface and makes his famous statement, that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Or he was supposed to say, that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. And to his dying day, he said he did say a man. And there's been tons of research into this as far as whether or not it was lost in a little of transmission, whether it was covered up by some static. Who knows? Even if he didn't say it right, you can't blame the person who's stepping foot onto the surface of the moon for the first time for maybe missing the letter A in a sentence. But regardless, very historic moment. Oh, by the way, when they were landing, Neil Armstrong's heart rate was 188.
Wow. Pretty high.
When they landed on the surface of the moon. Yep, a little bit high. So it was down below 100 very quickly afterwards. But yeah, when they were landing on the surface, it was 188. They lost transmission on Buzz's suit, so they don't know what his heart rate was. So Buzz's heart rate was generally lower, just FYI. But he wasn't the one flying the spacecraft either. So in any case, though, Neil gets out. He's got a Hasselblad camera on him. He started to grab, the tools on the surface. He takes a scoop up of dirt, puts it into a plastic bag, and puts that in his pocket. That's a contingency sample. Just in case they have to make a quick exit off the moon, they at least brought back something. So that's one of the first things that he does on the surface of the moon. About 19 minutes later, Buzz comes out. This is Buzz coming down the ladder. And he steps out on the surface of the moon, and his first word, is magnificent. Neil Armstrong makes a comment, isn't the view magnificent? And Buzz Aldrin says, yep, magnificent desolation. Great statement about what's going on. They jointly read what the plaque is that's on the lunar lander leg, and you can see it's right between the ladder rungs, right here on that leg right there. Here, men from planet Earth first step foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD. We came in peace for all mankind, signed by the 3 astronauts and Richard Nixon, who was the president at the time. And then they start getting to work because they have a very short EVA, not like the hours and hours long EVAs that they might have had 3 of them, on the Apollo 17 mission. Here they have 1 EVA and it's really short. Once again, we don't know what we don't know. They didn't know how well the water system, water was going to last, the cooling system, all these sort of things. So they kept everything very short. They did extend it by about 15 minutes, but still kept it extremely short. The solar wind experiments, they planted the flag in the ground. It only went in about 2 inches. They learned a lesson. Don't put the flag this close to the spacecraft. Because when that engine lights off, the ascent engine, it will blow the flag over. And it did. The video shows it getting knocked over. They put it a little bit further out, and you can see that back in the picture back there from a later mission, a little bit further out. Away from the spacecraft. They planted it in the ground. They discovered how difficult it was to get stuff into the lunar surface. They could only get in a couple inches. Turns, Neil Armstrong steps back, and Buzz Aldrin does a West Point salute. So this is a picture of Neil Armstrong. This is one of the few ones. Most of the pictures, virtually all of them that you see on the lunar surface, are of Buzz, because Neil had the camera. Neil set the camera down on the mesa. There's that mesa that I talked about. For a moment. And this is the Hasselblad camera that he had on his chest. Buzz picked it up and started taking, some pictures right there. Probably should have had Neil pose for a picture, but they were trying to get everything done in a short period of time. He did get a little bit further away. He was taking pictures of what the lunar surface looked like. These were things he was supposed to do, with the moon boot imprint and things like that. He did take this picture back of Neil working at it. And it was, besides which, it would be tough to tell the difference between Neil and Buzz anyways, because they were wearing the exact same spacesuit. Later missions, 13 and on, they put a red stripe on the commander's spacesuit so they could tell the two of them apart in video, etc. That picture right there, that's not the first step onto the moon. That's actually Buzz going, stomp, take a picture. On the surface of the moon, but very iconic. But most people think that's the first step onto the moon. It's not. Was not. Same image of it. Ran around putting experiments out on the surface. The early Apollo equipment or experiment package, ESEP, science experiment package, EASEP, were the things that they put out. There's a laser reflector that you could aim a laser from Earth at the moon, get a reflection back. Big Bang Theory, they do that in one of the episodes. But in any case, though, and we can use it for precise measurements to the lunar surface. Ones were put out on a couple other missions. They had a seismic experiment that they put out, flapped out solar arrays. That lasted for a number of months, but did fail by the end of the year. But it was measuring seismic activity, could even sense their footfalls on the surface of the moon as they're running around. Here is Buzz carrying the items out to place them further away from the spacecraft. There's that PASIC, the seismic experiment, and then back here you see the laser reflector pointed back towards Earth. They didn't get that far away from the spacecraft. This picture is the furthest that they got away from the spacecraft, and Neil had gone over to get some pictures right around that adjacent crater that was nearby. In any case, there's Buzz on the surface of the moon, another famous picture. You can see Neil in the reflection right there. Okay, Neil Armstrong, it suddenly struck me that that tiny pea, pretty and blue, was the Earth. I put my thumb and shut one eye, and my thumb blotted out the planet Earth. I didn't feel like a giant. I felt very, very small. So there's Buzz doing that salute to the American flag after they planted it. Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter. So that's where the descent module is on the lunar surface. And with this, you can't really see it. But if you look at it, there's a crater right there. That's the furthest that they got away. And you can see the experiment packages were put out here, that they walked out here, they walked over to here, and then they walked out to here. You can see where the astronauts walked from each of their missions if you go and look at those Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter images. So absolutely phenomenal. Mike Collins, he was alone in the command module. I'm alone now, truly alone and absolutely isolated from any known life. I am it. If a count were taken, the score would be 3 billion plus 2 over on the other side of the moon, and 1 plus God knows what on this side. That was in his book, Carrying the Fire. So there he is, not on the mission, but training, but all alone in the command module, orbiting around. Eventually, the lunar module does lift off from the lunar surface. They get back into the spacecraft. At the last moment, they remember that we're supposed to put a memorial thing on the moon, a little envelope. Buzz pulls it out of his pocket and throws it. Out there, it had a silicon disc. It had a little gold olive branch and an Apollo 1 patch on the inside of it. So he tosses it out there to be left on the lunar surface. They get back in. While Buzz is getting himself around in there, he moves around with the Bliss backpack and breaks off one of the switches for the engine arm. Are we going to be stuck on the lunar surface? Don't know. Necessity is the invention, is the mother of invention. Felt tip pen. Stuck into there, used to operate the switch. So felt tip. So in any case, though, so they do launch off the lunar surface, knock the flag over on their way off. So come up. This is a picture from Columbia. Looking back, obviously, this is on the way back up for rendezvous because they're missing half of their spacecraft down here, the descent module section. This is the picture from Eagle looking back towards Columbia, which was their command module. They had call signs for each spacecraft, obviously. Docked up, fired up the engines, flew back towards Earth, did some broadcasts along the way, and landed back on Earth. When the spacecraft landed in the ocean, it landed upside down. It landed and flipped upside down, into a stable 2 condition, which basically means, we're not sinking, but they're upside down. The landing bags eventually deploy, and after a few minutes, the spacecraft rights itself. Frogmen come alongside. You can see they're in isolation garments, biological isolation garments. They open up the hatch to the spacecraft, throw in isolation garments for the astronauts, who then are putting them on. They shut the hatch back up while that's being done. They get the astronauts out, put them into the raft. They spray them down and wash them off with the isolation garments while they're there with them. They do the same with each other. And the hatch is shut at this point in time. They kind of wipe off everything around the hatch, and then they helicopter the astronauts off onto up to the helicopter, bring them back to the aircraft carrier, and then we'll get to a point in what happens from there. But in mission control, they're celebrating. The cigars are out, flags are waving. Up on the job is task accomplished, talking about John F. Kennedy's goal to send a man safely to the moon and send a man to the moon and bring him safely back to Earth by the end of the decade. They did it. The helicopter comes back, lands. They essentially roll it over to one of the elevators. It goes down to the hangar deck. They bring it across. The astronauts come out in their isolation garments. You see nobody's really around them, and they get into a converted RV. So. Mobile quarantine facility, because they were quarantining them for 3 weeks. So along with all of their equipment and everything, eventually the command module gets picked up out of the ocean, brought over, brought down. They put up a tent tunnel between the command module and the mobile quarantine facility. They bring out all of the samples, seal the command module back up, wash it down, etc. And then all of that material and the people stay in the mobile quarantine facility for 3 weeks. They move that, they fly them inside aircraft, they go back to Hawaii, they offload it, and eventually, they have ceremonies there, put it into an aircraft, fly it to Houston, offload it, truck it over to Johnson Space Center, et cetera, et cetera. So, in any case, Manned Space Flight Center. But here they are getting into the quarantine facility. President Nixon was on board talking with them inside. The buttons that they're wearing say Hornet +3 because they came back on the USS Hornet. Here, in fact, you can see it right there. Neil, Mike, and Buzz. Here's the inside of the mobile quarantine facility. So there it is getting loaded into an aircraft. After they get out, public relations tour like crazy, as you can imagine. Speak in front of a joint session of Congress. Ticker tape parades in New York and Chicago. And if I remember correctly, this is the Chicago parade, although I'd have to go back and take a look to find out specifically. But there's the astronauts right there inside one of the vehicles. So, yeah, a lot about Apollo 11. When they came back, so this is, this is mine, so that's why I can hold it without white gloves, So, first American astronauts landing on the moon, one small step for man, etc. There was stuff everywhere. The Snoopy banners that had existed that you hear me talking about at some of the other lectures that we give. So we had the ones that said all systems are go. Now we have the moon is made of American cheese. So that went out. Books, etc. But this is what got us to the moon. And this is actually one of the ones that got us to the moon. This was my father-in-law's that he used while he was working at North American Aviation. So in any case, don't tell me we can't do anything. So, because we sent people to the moon using computers that had a microscopic amount of the computing power that we have nowadays. We've learned a lot since then. We're going back to the moon, and we'll go to Mars as well with no problem. At the time, every company wanted to get on board with things that supported NASA and their program. There's a great book called Marketing the Moon that's by David Meerman Scott and Richard Jurek, a couple of personal friends of mine. So yeah, I'm plugging the book of a couple of friends. NASA is using this now as their source for how to move forward with the Artemis program, which is NASA's new program to go to the moon, Artemis being the sister of Apollo. In any case, so great name, for the program moving forward. In any case, though, this will, if we could, I'll get to the question part afterwards. So in any case, though, this absolutely phenomenal about that. Tons of books up here. Mike Collins wrote some great ones. First on the Moon, Carrying the Fire. There's A Man on the Moon by Andrew Chaikin. Norman Mailer's Moonfire is a good one. PBS specials. These days, everybody's trying to get on board again. So Lego came out with Saturn V. Rocket you see over here that was released last year. This year, the lunar module that you see down there, one of the best Lego sets I've ever built. I've got 9 kids, and the boys and I are Lego nuts. So in any case, yeah, these are the ones from my office. In any case, though, so things like that, and this is the box with that. We're the same. We've put out our Apollo 50th anniversary shirts here, for the museum. It's got our name on the back, etc. Oreo, no kidding. Moon, marshmallow moon Oreos with a glow-in-the-dark package and special, imprinting on the things. So you're seeing a ton of that right now. Lastly, make sure you do. We have an Apollo 17 moon rock up on the 4th floor, big one that you can see, one of the large samples, or a portion of one of the large samples that was brought back. President Nixon ordered NASA to create a presentation piece that went to all the nations of the world. One presentation piece went to all the nations of the world and each of the 50 states and territories. New Mexico got one as well, and it had 4 small pieces of an Apollo 11 moon rock. New Mexico's presentation piece is right here. So when you get a chance, it's just got a little button there that's got those 4 pieces. They're like rice grain size pieces of the Apollo 11 moon rock. Many of those have disappeared from around the world, as you can well imagine. Give it to a dictator. You never know where it's going to end up. Some of the state ones are missing too. So. But in any case, ours is the New Mexico's is part of our collection. It's right here. We haven't had it on display yet. It will go on display July 20th for the first time here at the museum. So alongside our Apollo 17 moon rock. So in any case, I won't even bother with the next. Well, actually, I'll just skip right past it. Yeah, but I always use that one at the end. So. And now we're up to questions and comments, and I'll just, and feel free. This is the time. Feel free to leave anytime you want, because I have a feeling this discussion could go on for a while. Because this is open up not just for questions, but also give recollections if you want.
Can you elaborate on what's the first woman on the moon? When's that going to happen?
When we fly back to the moon.
That's
So right now, the Trump administration has given NASA the charge to get people back to the moon by 2024. This is all happening very quickly. There's been a number of times when we've said, okay, get people to Mars. Bush, the last whole bunch of administrations have all tried to be Kennedy-esque. By the way, Kennedy wasn't always big on space and going to the moon or anything like that. PBS has got a great documentary coming out on July 8th. Chasing the Moon, thank you. We just previewed little bits of it a week and a half ago, and almost 2 weeks ago now. So, and bing, I blanked on that name, Chasing the Moon. During that, they have the audio from the meetings inside the White House where Kennedy's sitting there going, I'm not really all that interested in space, and da da da. He's all these other priorities, but Cold War, etc. So eventually his advisors tell him, we need to, we really need to be pushing. The Eisenhower administration was really pushing for it. So Kennedy administration at first not so much, but they get on board, and in the end he gets convinced of the decision, try and send a man to the moon and bring him back, because that was something that was far enough out and really played to our strengths. Our strengths, not the Russian strengths, which like space station and things like that would have been more in their strengths. So in any case, that's the charge he set. That's what gave that end, that finish line for the Russians and U.S., because it was broadcast to the entire world. Now there was a finish line that we could beat them to, and we did, in the end. Now, since administrations have tried to do the same thing, and it's just continually failed. This administration is trying to do the same thing. It said, hey, Mars, we're going to get there in the 2030s, something like that, but we need to go back to the moon. We need to get there by 2024. Interestingly enough, they actually are putting money towards it. So that's a first of all of these things. Usually it's like, we need to do this. NASA's like, okay, to do that, we need, and the administration's like, yeah, no. So, and it just kind of died there. So now we're looking at it. NASA's pushing, Bridenstine and his team are pushing really hard at it. They're marketing it, more, pushing with more money that's being given to them. So will it happen by 2024? I can give you odds on that one, and they're not good. And that's just because of the technical issues. On the other hand, if you were asking me odds on that first mission when we go back to the moon, will there be a female astronaut on that crew? You tell me, So I can almost 100% guarantee you that yes, there will be, because it was a male bastion back in the 1960s at that point in time. Now the astronaut crew, commanders, everything, so it mixed crews, female commanders, space station, the shuttle at the time, blah, 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 all these sort of things. So, and that's the way we work, so it's team effort, everybody, nobody left out. So, yeah, there will be a woman. I don't know if she'll be the commander or one of the crewmen or whatever else, but there will be, women stepping foot on the moon on that first mission. So, barring catastrophe. So, yes, sir.
The Orion capsule, which is the next
Yep.
generation, they've already tested it twice here.
Yep.
Moon launch and drop.
Yep.
But NASA has also sent a rocket launch, and it should be here next week or two, that they're going to launch from
Yep.
White Sands to test parachutes and release systems.
Yep. So we have two things that are being tested out there. So not only the Orion, but also the Starliner. So because the Orion space capsule, coming back and landing, but the Starliner spacecraft, which Boeing's building, which will fly soon, is going to land here at White Sands when they start taking astronauts up to the International Space Station. Its primary and secondary launch sites are at White Sands. Tertiary is up in Utah. So we'll have astronauts coming back to Earth here in New Mexico in the very near future. The Orion space capsule, yep, we've done some tests of the parachute systems where they either have lifted off from White Sands Test Facility and dropped it back there, depends on the wind conditions, or they launch it from Spaceport America down at the end of their runway. They have a launch area, so they launch it on one of these gigantic balloons. It floats across the San Andreas Mountains over there and then drops down on White Sands Missile Range. That's obviously during the higher wind times. And now, as you said, sir, they are about to test. Remember those pictures that showed the Apollo command module on the top of, as we have outside here, a little Joe 2 rocket? They are going to have a rocket system out here. It's going to take off with the capsule on the top of it, fire the ejection system, come back and land. So they're going to test that all up out here from White Sands, the launch platforms, which are closer to the actual headquarters. So, best viewing points probably are closer down to that end, maybe up on the pass or something like that. So, in any case, though, keep your eyes open for that. I don't know how much of an announcement they'll do for that. So, yes, sir.
I got another question about Neil Armstrong.
And then I'll get to you, sir.
When I worked at Rocketdyne, they said the key to the moon landing is being able to dock in space.
Yes.
Did Armstrong train on the Gemini docking?
Yes. Neil Armstrong and Dave Scott flew a mission to dock with the Agena spacecraft during the Gemini program. It almost killed the both of them.
Really?
So they docked with the Agena spacecraft, which had flown up, unmanned, so they docked into it and then almost instantaneously started a very large roll of the two spacecraft together. What had happened was a hand controller, one of the engines had failed and was firing continuously of their maneuvering engines. They tried to get control of the spacecraft and just couldn't get control of it with the normal maneuvering system. And Neil tried it, Dave Scott tried it. Neither of them could do it. Now they're spinning really fast. They're starting to black out. They're losing vision, et cetera, because of this tumble that they're in. It wasn't until they finally shut off the computer-controlled RCS system, and went to a manual control over it. Now they're in manual control like this, but the computers are really reacting to what they're doing. They went to one where it's literally manual, and the computers weren't controlling it anymore, and that shut off the thruster. And with the actual reaction control system, they were able to get control of the spacecraft. So, and they undocked from the Agena very quickly at the beginning of when this barrel roll started. So other questions or comments, sir?
I was in Taipei and there was a full moon
Mm-hmm.
when this occurred.
I'm
Does
sorry.
that happenstance?
The full moon. Well, if you take a look at the pictures of when they launch and they're on their way, happenstance to a point. No, really, it's just they had to launch when the lighting was going to be right. So it was, yes, it was definitely done on purpose, but not so that there was a full moon when it was going. It was launched at that point in time so that when they landed at Tranquility Base, the sun would be behind them between a 7 and 20 degree angle. So it just happened to be that the lineup for that was such as that. Sir, back there. Yeah. So I'm sorry.
Ask one of the probably most obvious questions, and that is, if these guys are in spacesuits for several days, how do you take care of
They're not. So when they walk out to the spacecraft, they're in that A7L spacesuit with just a bubble helmet, So you don't see the big, like helmets like kind of on the back thing back there. You don't see that big cover helmet over that. You just see them walking along, bubble helmets, going out to the launch pad. Then they get into the spacecraft. They're inside that suit. They launch off. Once they get up into space, once they turn around, dock, once they get into space, they take the helmets off. Because you're not in the situation where you're expecting there to be a problem, where you might depressurize the spacecraft, kind of thing. So they take the helmets off, they take the gloves off, so now they have their hands, etc. They turn around, they come back, they dock with the lunar module, pull it out, fire the engines on their way their engines are already going, but they fire the thrusters to maneuver away from the upper stage. They're on their way to the moon now. Now they get out of their spacesuits. And they put on a in-flight garment, which is a white. We don't have one on. We used to have one on display in the museum on the second floor. We don't currently have one on display. We will have one back on display by the anniversary. In any case, though, the in-flight garments are kind of a white beta cloth material, trousers, and then almost like a jackety kind of thing that they've gone on over that. Very lightweight that they wear. Fireproof, etc. Well, fire resistant. As well, and that's what they wear on the way to the moon. Now, when they're getting ready to undock and head down to the moon, yes, they put the spacesuits back on. But flying to and from the moon, they're in the in-flight garments. It's like the astronauts nowadays. You see them, they're in like a blue jumpsuit, but when they're launching and returning, they're in some sort of spacesuit or launch and escape suit. So, yeah. And in fact, they tried to create a comfortable spacesuit for the Gemini 7 mission, which was Jim Lovell and Frank Borman. and it was nicknamed the grasshopper suit because it had this kind of zip over helmet kind of thing, etc. And they were up there for 12 days. They hated it, and they begged NASA to let them get out of those spacesuits. NASA said no, no, no. Finally relented and let one of them get out of it at a time for a period of time. So, yep, sir.
Do you think China's talking about building stuff on the moon? Is that driving our new interest in the moon?
It's just a piece. It's a piece of many things. We're trying to get to Mars. We want to get to Mars, and you've had a great debate within the space community of, do you just skip the moon and go straight to Mars, Obama administration, okay? Or do we go to the moon and learn more about living long periods of time on another body, doing exploring the lunar surface more, et cetera, and then go on to Mars? And so the current administration, that's one out. Let's go back to the moon, do more science, learn about living on another planet, continue testing all of these systems that we think we're going to be using on Mars, et cetera, then go on to Mars later on. So now the push is like return to the moon, and it's also timed with the 50th anniversary. There's politics is always just look at where the contractors that were chosen, the locations for space centers, everything. NASA, by nature then becomes not just a scientific, but also it's a political thing as well.
2 questions.
And like I said, feel free to leave at any point in time, so.
When as Armstrong's descent onto the moon, the cameras how did the camera get there?
Okay, that was what I was mentioning during the lecture. As Neil Armstrong is coming down the ladder, there's a D-ring attached to a cable that he can reach out and grab a hold of the D-ring. He pulls that. That releases the MESA, the Modular Equipment Support Assembly, that thing that you saw him, that picture from the lunar surface, you saw him and there was something sticking off the side of the spacecraft where the equipment for their lunar sample tools and things like that were located. So that folds down off the side of the spacecraft. On the end of that is a camera that activates when that happens with the cables going back into the lunar module. That films him from the side coming down the ladder, one of the pictures you saw. One of the other pictures you saw was from up above. That's a camera in the window of the lunar module pointing down at the leg that has the ladder rungs on it. So, and that's how they get the film of him coming down. Not that the camera inside was broadcasting TV. That one was not. That video footage we don't see until they get back. The one outside is the one that's broadcasting back to Earth.
And you said as he was making his landing, he had 15 seconds of fuel.
Yeah, just about.
Did the little module, did he walk back to the space thing to take him back to Earth, or did he fly that thing back? You know what I'm saying?
The 15 seconds of fuel remaining was inside. The lunar module is made up of an ascent and a descent assembly. So you've got the ascent and the descent assembly. So the fuel remaining was inside this because there's an engine down here. That's bringing them down. They land. So, and then, yeah, separate. This has got fuel in and of itself. If they had run out of fuel, they could have hit the abort button, and then this engine separates them and flies it away. This crashes in the lunar surface. And that's what they do anyways when they're ready to leave. They fire this, and that goes away. We have these engines, the ascent, the descent engine, and the maneuvering engines on display inside the museum as well, that you can go ahead and view. Does anybody know what the first words spoken from the lunar surface were? Nope. Nope. And I'm trying to get the exact, because I thought I had it in the slide there, and I want to make sure. Okay. Nope. Usually, no, people don't know. So the first words spoken from the surface of the moon, and it depends on what you consider the surface of the moon. The spacecraft comes down, and at the end of a couple of these legs, there's a little probe that sticks down about 67 inches. That senses when it touches the surface of the moon, and they call it contact light because you get a light coming up because, gee, you're coming down, and all of a sudden, boop, that antenna-like thing touches the lunar surface. Contact light What's supposed to happen at that point in time is you're still a few feet above the lunar surface when that happens. They shut off the engine, you drop down, boom, and you're standing up, the legs absorb that shock in the 1/6 gravity. In this situation, Neil didn't shut the engines down really until the legs touched down. But in any case, though, Buzz Aldrin did call out contact light. So that could be the first word from the surface of the moon because that tip was speaking there. But regardless, once they hit down, you had Aldrin saying, okay, engine stop, ACA, out of detent. Armstrong says, out of detent, auto. Mode control, both auto. Descent engine command, override off, engine arm off. 413 is in. So basically the first words from the surface of the moon were all of the things for putting the switches into the correct position now that you've landed. Then after a big pause, you get the Capcom and Neil Armstrong going back and forth, and Neil says, Houston Tranquility Base, the Eagle has landed, but Capcom says something to him before that. But when Capcom says, when Charlie Duke says tranquility, and you go back and listen to any of this, or you watch it in the video when you watch Apollo 11, he's so hyped up as well. You can imagine everybody on the ground was hyped up as well in mission control. So he doesn't say tranquility base. He actually starts to say twangquility base. He's like, twang, and he says twang. He's like tranquility base. So, and he still, he laughs about it. You can see it on the video. He says, oh man, I said tranquility. So it's kind of funny. So, but yeah, those were the first words from the surface of the moon. So, any other questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Sometime when you were talking in your presentation, I didn't hear you as an adult. I heard you as a 12-year-old boy or whatever you were when you were watching it.
One of my earliest memories.
Yeah. Did they offer educational programs for kids to learn more?
Remember back at the time in the 50s and 60s, there was a big science push in the school programs. Do you remember? You were an elementary school teacher. How much of a push that was? What's that?
I taught kindergarten.
Yeah, it was different. But when you got into the older ages, yes, it was a push. But it was really not necessarily moon related. It was science related, because we thought we were lagging behind. So, and I'll just say these days, it's far worse. Far worse. So, the emphasis, within the school districts is different. And, for us pushing forward in the world, we probably need to keep working on that one. So, sir.
You stored the whole,
I'm sorry, what?
you have stored history.
Mm-hmm.
What is your position?
Well,
Kind of like giving us a little bit of a
so I'm not, he was asking what, he said I store a lot of information in my brain. So, sadly, I can retain all this sort of stuff. But if you told me, if somebody comes up and tells me their name right now, 5 seconds later, I'll be in the conversation with a person. I'm like going, what was their name again? Still having the conversation with them. So funny. No, my background was as a submarine officer in the United States Navy. And so kind of nuclear engineer, sub driver kind of worked together. Did that for 20 years, although I did have 2 stints. I taught at Cornell University as a junior officer at a naval ROTC unit and taught engineering and weapon systems as an adjunct instructor there, and did that for 2.5 years. The last posting I had in the Navy was at University of Kansas. I was the executive officer and commanding officer at separate times of the naval ROTC unit there, and so was the professor of naval science and taught leadership, management, ethics, history for those. I'm not a historian. My degree's in naval architecture. But when I planned that trip to my family to the Kansas Cosmosphere and Space Center, and then they had a posting for the resignation of the current president and CEO, and my wife kind of convinced me to send my resume in because I said it sounded interesting. I was lighting a job up in Kansas City kind of thing. So sent my resume in, ended up running the museum, embarked on a, learning, as quickly as possible. Much more of what I had knew about casually, because I read a lot, kind of thing. So, but was not in any way, shape, or form degreed or an expert in, And so that's now been a 13-year journey from 2006 until now of learning all of this information. So, and now I'm fortunate that folks, I give lectures in a lot of different locations. I'll be kind of all over the state giving lectures for the next few months, and end up on TV as well with Science Channel, Discovery Channel, and things like that. So just learned it as it went along. So
Do you use the internet to learn things?
I still do. Yep. So books, the internet, everything. So the internet's a great source, but you have to be very careful. And when you see something on the internet, you always have to look at the source information for what you're reading. And so lots of times, you can read an article, but if it's not sourced, don't really go with it. Always go back to the source documentation. So, yes, ma'am.
How tightly aligned is the spaceport and things?
Not extremely. So yeah. So and once again, the spaceport is it's an airport, but it's a spaceport, but it's an airport. So I was just over there last week meeting with Dan Hicks and taking a look at current operations and seeing what Virgin Galactic they're working like crazy, getting themselves established on the inside there. So the spacecraft, the Virgin spaceship and their carrier aircraft will be here in the not too distant future, and they'll finish their testing program out at Spaceport America. But they're really an airport, and they're just trying to get more tenants out of the airport. Same as the El Paso airport tries to get United and Delta and Alaska, which and things like that. Spaceport America is trying to do the same thing, but also not just horizontal launch, but also vertical launch. They have some small vertical launch companies that are doing suborbital flights. They're trying to get into the bigger realm. Now, for the future of Spaceport, I think you got a couple things. Yes, the tourism part is going to be the startup part of it here, Virgin Galactic, and I think there's going to be another announcement in the not too distant future about another similar type of tenant moving into there. I think their long-term future rests in vertical launch. And not vertical launch like we think of with liquid-fueled rockets taking off from Kennedy or from out in Virginia or California, where there's an ocean that they can drop those big stages back in. It's in single stage to orbit and multi-stage where you can bring back and land. Seen SpaceX do that, and land the craft, because out here, and NASA's got a big push on right now for single stage to orbit. That's basically a single rocket going all the way. So you don't have to drop anything back, on your way to orbit. Once that, really gets going, so many advantages out here. Florida has all the negatives of the weather. Gee, lightning capital of the United States. Great place to put a launch facility, so launch is delayed, all sorts of like that. It's right down at sea level. The first mile is free. Out here, you're already, almost a mile up. The weather, it's New Mexico, so gee, how many clear sunny days do we have during the year, kind of thing. So yeah, a couple. So in any case, that's the big future for them, and they're just using a small percentage of their capability right now. Even once Virgin gets up, so they're going to be using like 6% of their capacity, to do that. So so that's kind of where, but working directly with NASA, not so much, so it's more of a tenant-driven kind of thing. So NASA has some involvement with some of the launches out there that are being done by tenants. So, but yeah, different. Yes, sir.
I have a three-part question. Number one, I think all of the memory capability was probably cold storage, and was it supplied by IBM? And third part, compared to what's in all of our brand new automobiles today, how many thousand times more capability do we have in the car?
I've heard so many different numbers about the processing capability, so like the digital watch, that some people have with stuff has more computing power than the Apollo navigation system. I mean, these things, crush the Apollo computer system, and I've heard so many different numbers that I don't even throw one out there anymore. So on there was There was essentially, yeah, you're right. It was core storage, rope memory modules and stuff that actually, when you talk about rope memory modules, they actually kind of threaded the way that the memory was working with the signals going through it. And so it was almost a seamstress-like activity to create these memory modules. So, and if you want to know what one of those looks like, we have a primary guidance and navigation system set up on the third floor of the museum on 3A, one of only 2 remaining in the United States. One's at MIT and one's here, that are complete. And at the bottom of it, you see modules that are about this big that are, that are in there. Those are rope memory modules for the computers. So, and I can't remember, I don't think it was IBM specific. There were I'm trying to remember. There were 30 main contractors and like 1,000 subcontractors. That were, excuse me, about 20,000 subcontractors that were involved with the Apollo program. And I can't remember specifically which one did all of that, but I didn't think it was IBM specific for that. So, but I'd have to look it up. So, anything else? We'll do one last question.
Well, one last comment about one of the improvements that's happened over the last 50 years. At the time of Apollo's landing on the moon, the stiffest thing we knew was material was beryllium. But at that time, as the beginning of the graphite epoxy revolution, and now graphite epoxy is like, I don't know how many times stiffer than beryllium. So now you can make these really great vehicles very, very light.
Yep, and the beryllium was what got recalled because they needed it for the defense, for strategic defense. Beryllium was recalled from all these different locations, and one of the locations where there was a lot of beryllium was in those primary guidance units. And so that's why when I talk about only complete ones, we've got one. And that's because ours was a Frankenstein. MIT's make sense because they put the things together, design them, et cetera. So their lab has got one. Ours was a Frankenstein where they pulled pieces from many different spacecraft and cobbled them together and put it together. So we have pieces that flew on 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, Skylabs 1, 2, and 3. So on the inside of it, and it kind of flew under the radar because it was a hodgepodge. So thank you so much for coming. Enjoy all of the Apollo 11 50th anniversaries. Come back, see our museum. Get up and take a look at the rocks. There's books up here if you're curious about some of the good books about it. Buy Legos for your kids. And if you're curious what the Russian moon rocket looked like, there's a model of it, the N1. This was about the same height as our Saturn V.